My name is Matthew Fritz, and today I'm going to be going over a really silly situation I ran into while laying down some guitar tracks and needing to tune the guitar. So I've seen this situation come up multiple times on things like the Steinberg forums or just general audio forums where they're not getting a signal through a digital tuner when they're using an audio interface. So for the context of the video today, I'm going to be using this right here. It's the Focusrite Scarlett Solo. It's a 2-in, 2-out USB audio interface. I really like Focusrite stuff. I think they make really great equipment, and a lot of the people that I know of, at least that are running into this issue, are using either that audio interface or a similar one. I know IK Multimedia makes a guitar interface as well that will also have this issue come up. But this video is primarily for people that are recording through a simpler audio interface, maybe just has one input, and they're in something like, let's say, their home studio or maybe a bedroom, just, a small kind of setup, but they're wondering why their digital tuners are not working. So let's go ahead and get into a demonstration of the problem right now. All right, so to demonstrate the problem, let's actually take a look at how I'm using this interface. So let's go over to Chrome and then load up a picture here. All right, so if you notice on the right, I took a picture of how I actually have my Focusrite Scarlett set up. There's a single instrument port right here that I have a 1/4-inch cable going into. I have the gain knob on the instrument channel, which is number 2, turned up about a quarter of the way, and the inst setting is active because I'm going to be sending in an unamplified guitar or bass signal. If you were using something like an electric piano, that would essentially become your line in channel, and you would turn the inst setting off because you already have some kind of other, direct kind of sound coming in. So for our inst setting, we're just going to be sending in our raw guitar signal and it will be processed. So for the tuner and the actual demonstration of the fact that we're getting an audio signal to begin with, I'm going to be using the AmpKnob RevC from Bogren Digital. It is no secret how much I love Bogren Digital stuff, so let's go ahead and get that loaded up. All right, so here's the AmpKnob RevC. It's muted by default to avoid the feedback, which is really good here. So our default settings, I have it using the Scarlett Solo USB as the input. The output is connected to my Logi USB headset, so I can hear it, and everything is the defaults in terms of the input and output channels, sample rate, audio buffer size, input mode gate, all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and get connected here. I'm going to use one of my guitars, my ESP EX50 here, and let's see what we get in terms of tone. So I'm going to demonstrate that we're actually getting tone in and we're getting a signal actually processed first up. So let's go ahead and connect you right in here. The 1/4-inch. That's also why we have this muted, in case we accidentally miss the input signal and we start generating some kind of really weird noise. So let's go ahead now and turn the mute off and just show that we're getting some kind of signal. All right, so mute's going off. We have the gain turned up to about 0.7. It's kind of a simple rhythm, doesn't really matter what it is. It's just to kind of demonstrate that tone is actually coming out of this thing. So let's just lay down a simple line. I'm thinking open string, 3rd fret, 5th fret on the E. Same thing on the A, and we'll just kind of move around a bit just to demonstrate that we're using multiple strings, we're hitting multiple octaves, we're playing multiple notes, because you'll see what the problem is in a second. So let's just kind of start noodling around a little bit. All right, so we're actually getting something out of this. I'm going to go ahead and turn my volume and tone knobs on the guitar all the way down. Now, the fact that we're getting audio processed is good. We actually want to see that. But now let's open up the tuning settings since we know we're actually getting a signal. All right, so here's the tuner inside of the AmpKnob RevC. One of the things I hate the most as a guitarist is tuning. The AmpKnob makes this extremely, extremely easy. But in our default settings, something interesting happens when we try to tune. So we just saw that we're getting an audio signal. Now let's try to use the tuner. So I'm hitting the low E, no signal. Let's try the A, no signal. Okay, and we saw that I was just using both of these strings and I was getting sound processed. So what's going on? Now, if we go back to the picture of the Focusrite audio interface, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that the instrument input is essentially a mono signal. And what we usually think about recording is we think about stereo a lot because we think about microphones, we think about our voices. We don't think about a direct line coming in and being a mono signal. So 90 to 95% of the problems you'll encounter when you're trying to use a digital tuner and you're not really seeing it work is the fact that you're connected essentially to the wrong channel and you're looking at the wrong input. So let's go back and actually look at those audio settings inside of the AmpKnob. So we'll go down here, gate and settings. All right, now our input is the Scarlett Solo USB just like it should be. However, our input channels are both 1 and 2. Now, channel 1 on the Focusrite Solo is over here. That's the XLR input for a microphone. It is controlled independently of the instrument input. So literally what we're saying right now when we have both input channels selected in the AmpKnob is we're saying process audio from both basically as a single unit for all intents and purposes because the AmpKnob is fundamentally an amplifier and a cab. We're saying take these two things together and process them as a single unit. Well, digital tuners don't understand things that way. If you think of an actual stomp box tuner, you're going to be plugging something directly into it and you'll be getting something out of it. A plug goes one way in, a plug comes one way out. It's the same kind of idea for the AmpKnob, as we'll see momentarily. All right, so now let's go ahead and modify our input channels knowing that we're going to be trying to receive a mono signal through our audio interface. So let's take out the XLR mic input of channel 1 and just receive input on channel 2. All right, so now we have that turned off. Let's now go back and try our tuner again. All right, now we're actually seeing some kind of signal, which is good. Let's try to, hit some of the strings and see what we get. All right, so low E, E, A, D, G, B, and our high E string for some reason is at F sharp. So let's go ahead and use the tuner for its intended purpose to actually tune this thing up. As cool of a sound as that is, that's a little low on the E. So let's take that up a little bit more here. D sharp, we're almost there. There's E. There we go. All right. All right, so now we've actually used the tuner for its truly intended purpose here. So that's how we're going to be using our tuners with an audio interface that we plug into in mono mode. So to recap, all we had to do was just take out our XLR input channel and make it so our only input was the mono channel, which was the direct instrument line, so we could physically tune it. All right, now let's move on to how we actually do this within a DAW, because there are other situations that can arise with, let's say, included tuners, and this can also be a situation that you can encounter where for some reason your audio just is not being recorded, period, even though you're seeing a signal being metered inside of your DAW. So for that, I'm going to be using Cubase. All right, let's go ahead and head into Cubase. So I'm going to close the standalone AmpKnob RevC so we can start working inside of a DAW and essentially replicate the same problem that we were having in the standalone, but within the context of Cubase itself. So let's go ahead and get that started. We're using Cubase 12 Artist. Gonna let that load. Excuse me. All right, and we're just going to use an empty project template here because we're not actually going to be recording anything or laying down tracks. We're just demonstrating an issue with different audio channels and how to use the digital tuners that are available to us. So we'll create the empty project. All right, I'm going to go into audio connections and studio setup here. Let's start with audio connections first, just to show that my input is set to the Scarlett Solo USB. It has the 2 channels as expected. And inside of our studio setup, we have our audio system set to Scarlett Solo USB. Our different channels are visible and they're all shown as active, so everything looks good right here. Now let's demonstrate the problem inside the DAW, just like we did with the standalone application. So I'm going to add an audio track. We have a set of audio inputs we can choose from. So let's essentially do a very similar situation to how we started off with the standalone application, and we'll select input 1 and 2 stereo. This is pretty common, like I was mentioning before, because we tend not to think about recording mono. We tend to think more in stereo because that's what we think of when we're recording voices or microphones or stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and add this stereo track. So now we have this audio stereo track here, and over here on the left we have a location for inserts. This is where we're going to add our tuner. So let's actually start with the Bogren Digital AmpKnob. So that is going to be listed under distortion. There's the AmpKnob RevC. Let's add that here, and it's loaded up. So we can do everything we need to do and play with it, but let's go into the tuner and we'll demonstrate the problem. So now we're no longer in the standalone AmpKnob, we're inside of Cubase and we're loading the AmpKnob as a VST effect. All right, so here's our tuner, and much like we saw before, I'm just going to go ahead and strike some strings. There's the low E, There's the A. And you'll notice that we're not seeing anything on the tuner itself. And just so you can see me doing this, I actually am truly picking the string and we're not getting anything through. All right, so let me stop doing that. So let's close this out here. And we just demonstrated the exact same problem that we had before. Now let's remove this track and add the track back as an actual mono track using the second channel for our mono instrument input. And we should see a difference. So back in audio inputs, we're going to select input 2 for our direct instrument in. Our configuration, we're going to say mono because it is a mono input. And let's add the track now. All right, so now we have a mono track, and we will now add the AmpKnob back as a VST insert here. So over to distortion, load up AmpKnob RevC, fires back up, head over to the tuner, and we're still not getting anything. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Let's actually try monitoring this track now. So we'll click out of here, and we already have the track armed to record, so let's now try monitoring. All right, fire up the RevC again, go into the tuner, let's see what we get. There we go. So now we have our mono track, we have our record armed on the track itself, and we're monitoring it. So inside the DAW, if we're not monitoring, we're not going to be able to see anything on this actual track using our tuner insert here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop smacking this string. Now, we can run into a very similar situation. It's not just the AmpKnob that's actually affected by this situation. Inside of Cubase, Steinberg has their own version of a tuner as well. So let's go ahead and remove this little thingy here. Well, actually, you know what? Let's not remove it. Let's change it up to Steinberg's own tuner, and we'll see the tuner itself working. All right, so Steinberg's built-in tuner, I'm going to be striking the E string again. There we go. I've heard smatterings and rumors about Steinberg's own tuner inside of Cubase not being too particularly accurate. So there's another tuner that people tend to like to use. We'll load that in right now as well, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw that Steinberg's own tuner works, because a lot of the complaints on the Steinberg forums that I've noticed have been about the built-in tuner in Cubase not working. This is how you solve that situation when you're using an audio interface, and a lot of people have trouble with the same Focusrite Scarlett Solo interface that I'm using. So what you do is the track has to be added as the mono configuration, and for the solo, the channel is input 2, because that is your mono instrument in. So let's look at this other tuner that people really seem to like. I also kind of like it. It's called G-Tune. And it looks kind of like one of those kind of digital chromatic tuners. So let's play with it a little bit and see what we get. So I'm going to strike the low E string here. All right, that's pretty cool. You know, a lot of guitarists are used to seeing something like this. Let's strike the A. There we go. Nice. So you'll notice that all of these things work now as we have our monitoring enabled and we're on a mono track. So I wanted to make sure that I showed both the problem and the solution inside of the DAW itself as well. So you're not only just seeing what it looks like in a standalone situation, but also what it looks like when you're trying to put a tuner on a track, or maybe you're wondering why your audio is not coming through. So one situation I'm also going to mention that kind of tipped me off to what was going on is when I'm actually striking this, and I was doing this originally, you might have seen this on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. See right down there in the lower right hand corner of the screen, those blue bars kind of jumping around? So there's a signal that's actually going into Cubase. It just wasn't being received by the track because the track was set to be associated with a channel that wasn't actually producing a signal. So the channel that's actually producing the signal was mono, but we were trying to combine the mono signal and the XLR input as a single channel, and just like how we saw with the standalone tuner in the Bogren Digital AmpKnob, all of the other tuners would have gotten confused in the same way. So always, always mono when you're doing an instrument in. I just realized that you couldn't actually see what I was talking about when I was referring to the input actually being monitored because the picture-in-picture of me was covering that up. So I've shrunken down the Cubase window a little bit so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So right down here in the lower right-hand corner of the Cubase window is where the actual input is going to be monitored. So I've got the G-Tune tuner back up, and let me actually show you this. All right, you see those blue bars dancing around now. That shows that we're really truly getting input signal. All right, I'm going to stop that. So even though we were getting signal, we still weren't connected to the proper channel on our audio track. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're wondering why you're not getting sound and you're seeing your meters jumping around. Check your actual track and the audio channel that's actually being used for the recording and the playing. All right, that is going to do it for this video. I hope this has been helpful to some degree, and thank you very much, and have a good one.